The wedding cake was sinking, the bride was screaming, a crocodile had just snatched the ring bearer's wig clean off his head, and somewhere beneath the chaos Karen was shrieking into her lavender megaphone while standing ankle-deep in my irrigation ditch. Yep, that's me. You're probably wondering how we got here. Let's just say if you're going to throw your daughter's luxury barn wedding on land you don't own, maybe double-check that it's not home to 160 legally protected crocodiles and the man who feeds them twice a day with a side of petty vengeance. Most folks retire to Florida because of the crocodiles. I retired with them after 32 years wrangling everything from Burmese pythons to drunk alligators and porta-potties for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I'd earned my quiet piece of earth. That piece just so happened to be 23 acres of tangled brush, lowland marsh, and a series of man-made aquatic enclosures originally constructed as part of a now-defunct federal conservation program. Long story short, when the agency got defunded, the government needed somewhere to rehome a whole mess of crocs, and nobody in D.C. wanted to pay for airfare. To Arizona, I volunteered, got the permits, did the paperwork, built a fence so strong it could stop a charging rhino, let alone a curious toddler. I named them all too. Some ironically Judge Judy Gatorade, Karen, some historically General Swampington Clucksworth. Don't ask, there were 60 in total, all tagged, tracked, and safely secured behind 3 layers of legal and literal barriers. And for 4 years, everything was peaceful until the real danger showed up in wedge heels and a visor. Her name was Karen Dolores Temple Wexler, but on the property map she had printed at the HOA office she'd sharpened in community, so she moved in 6 months ago, right on the edge of our 2 properties where the HOA's neatly gridded parcels ended and my swamp began. I remember the first time I met her, I was waist-deep in algae, wearing my chest waders and holding a bucket of thawed chicken thighs, calling out for Cluck Norris. She approached the fence like she owned it, hands on hips, sunglasses the size of frying pans. "Excuse me," she hollered through the chain link. "I'm getting complaints about a smell." I blinked. "Ma'am, you're standing 20 feet from a crocodile urinal. What exactly were you expecting?" She didn't laugh, just sniffed, made a note on her clipboard, and stalked off, muttering something about civilized property lines. I should have known right then. That was the beginning. She showed up again the next week, this time with a tape measure. Apparently the HOA had passed a new guideline that no body of standing water shall be within 50 feet of any residential structure unless approved for ornamental purposes. I pointed out 3 things. 1, my water wasn't standing, it was swarming. 2, my property wasn't in the HOA. And 3, the only thing ornamental about my ponds were the federally protected reptiles sunbathing like leathery retirees. She didn't care. She pulled out her phone and started taking pictures of my enclosures like she was auditioning for Dine. I reminded her again that she had no jurisdiction, but that didn't stop her from sending courtesy notices for excess vegetation, unregistered fauna, and once, I swear on Clucksorthus, skull ambient swamp noise exceeding 65 dB. I checked the letterhead. Oh, a printed no legal weight. But it was a warning. She was testing the water that fall. I noticed the lot stakes near the eastern edge of my land had been pulled up. Nothing big, no signs, just the kind of quiet, sneaky little things someone does when they think nobody's looking. I always am. I red-rove the stakes with my own survey markers and added a sign that read, "Private property, no trespassing, also crocodiles." The next morning, I found a yoga mat strung between 2 cypress stumps and a pamphlet for something called Zen by the Marcia Community Wellness Pilot, Karen's latest crusade. I left the mat there along with a fresh pile of crocs. The yoga stopped, but the campaign didn't. She began petitioning to res zone the marshland on my borders, citing underutilized green space and claiming it was an eyesore inconsistent with community aesthetics. She held HOA meetings on her back patio with a megaphone, loudly declaring her intention to beautify the borderlands. When she wasn't lobbying for a walking trail through my thistle patch, she was out there photographing my drainage ditches like they were national security threats. I tried to be neighborly, invited her to coffee once. She brought a complaint form, sent her an email with my permit documentation. She replied with a YouTube link about backyard wildlife management, even offered a tour explaining how the enclosures worked and the fact that the land was federally protected, complete with its own conservation easement. Her response: "We'll see what the county says." She didn't believe in boundaries, not physical ones, not legal ones, and certainly not ethical ones. She started referring to my property as the North Zone like she was playing Risk. It would have been funny if it wasn't so damn invasive. Things escalated when she installed a temporary fence 5 feet onto my land and claimed it was to delineate the event area. I tore it down. She called the sheriff. Sheriff showed up, took one look at the signs, the permits, and the 20-foot gator sunning itself beside the water pump, and politely suggested Karen go home before she got herself bitten. She told the sheriff I was weaponizing wildlife. He laughed. I didn't, because I knew Karen wasn't going to stop with fences and noise complaints. She was the type who thought persistence could replace permission, and when someone like that sets her sights on land she doesn't own, she'll try everything short of moving her couch into your shed. That's when the letters started, certified ones from the Community Beautification Committee, which I later discovered was just Karen, her cousin Brenda, and a Chihuahua in a vest. They claimed my habitat was a public nuisance and that exotic animal storage violated local residential codes. I faxed them back a copy of the federal wildlife registration forms, including the Department of the Interior seal, which I highlighted in red. No response. 2 weeks later, a landscaping crew showed up on behalf of the HOA and tried to mow down a 300 feet cattail bog. I stopped them halfway through, explained again that the marsh was protected. They left. Karen called me a wetland squatter. At the next board meeting, I might have let it slide. I really might have, but then she started canvassing the neighborhood, claiming the crocs were unstable, that the enclosures were improvised, and that I was harboring illegally trafficked reptiles. Word got around. I lost a few egg customers. Someone left a note in my mailbox that said, "We don't want Jurassic Park." I laughed, but the laughter had started to sound more like teeth grinding, because this wasn't about crocodiles anymore. It was about power control, and a woman who thought she could gaslight an entire neighborhood into thinking my land was hers to command. She even posted in the HOA newsletter that the marsh had untapped potential for future family-friendly gatherings. The phrase potential venue was used more than once. I decided it was time to reintroduce myself, not as the quiet old swamp guy, but as what I really was: a fully licensed, still federally recognized wildlife officer with a paper trail longer than her HOA bylaws, and a legal deed sealed under notary, so hard it could survive nuclear winter. I hired a drone crew to take aerial footage of the property lines, complete with GPS overlays. I printed 40 copies of my conservation easement, my FWS permits, and a notarized affidavit confirming that the marshland was considered critical habitat for 4 protected species, including 2 of the crocs. I delivered them in person, each folder sealed with red wax and stamped restricted. Karen refused to open hers, said it was intimidation. I called it documentation. That night she sent out an emergency newsletter titled Toxic Marsh Update. She claimed the neighborhood was at risk due to reptilian overflow. I don't even know what that means, but the next morning I found tire tracks on my lower field right where the event lawn was supposedly going to be. That's when I knew she wasn't backing off. In fact, she was just getting started. The only thing left was for her to make the one mistake she couldn't walk back from. And bless her lavendered soul, she made it with flowers, with rented folding chairs, and with an RSVP list 200 guests deep. But that part that's still coming. It started, as most land thefts do, with a clipboard and a lie. A Tuesday morning, hot as sin and twice as humid, I saw her marching across the southern slope, like she owned it, visor angled like a general's cap, clipboard bouncing on her hip, and that smug, purposeful gait of a woman 2 meetings away from a coup. Karen had graduated from HOA newsletters and megaphone rants to something far worse: land annexation. That morning, I found a laminated sign planted in the muddy patch just past the cattails, about 30 feet into my property. It read Future Willow Commons, reserved for community events. Below it in smaller print was the phrase pending landscape remediation. I stood there, coffee in one hand, dog-eared federal easement map in the other, and just stared. She'd actually done it. She was trying to manifest an HOA park through sheer willpower and yard signs. The kicker, she put a fake logo on it, some stock image of a tree with 4 leaves shaped like hearts, like that would soften the fact that she was now trespassing on a crocodile nursery. I thought maybe it was a prank, some misguided neighborhood art project, but then 2 days later I watched a survey crew roll up in an unmarked pickup and start hammering stakes into the soft earth. I asked them politely what they thought they were doing. The older guy with the clipboard looked confused and told me they were instructed by the HOA board to map a proposed public parcel at the southeast border. I laughed out loud, told them they were 42 feet into federal habitat with 0 legal authority and about 2 seconds away from violating 4 separate wildlife ordinances. The guy looked real uncomfortable and made a few phone calls. 5 minutes later, Karen showed up, hair curled, earrings jangling, and with a printed map so covered in highlighter that it looked like a preschool coloring project. "This is a commons area," she announced before I could speak per HOA Vote 6.32. I asked her when this vote took place. She said last week. I asked who voted. She said a quorum of eligible members. I asked for a roster. She said, and I quote, "You're not part of the community." I told her that was kind of the point. See, here's what really happened. Karen orchestrated a vote by mailing out a ballot postcard to all HOA residents with pre-filled boxes already checked in favor of the land grab. She told them it was an expansion proposal to create more shared space for gatherings and children's recreation. Most folks didn't respond, but she counted silence as consent. Then she forged a couple dozen proxy signatures from elderly residents she claimed couldn't attend in person. And boom, the vote passed. The Commons was born out of thin air and stolen ink. When I confronted her again about the legality of it all, she handed me a packet, 30 pages of faux legal jargon and clip art graphics with a cover letter that said, "We appreciate your cooperation in this exciting new chapter of neighborhood togetherness." That same night, she posted a celebratory photo on Nextdoor of herself holding a bottle of sparkling cider on what she claimed was the future heart of the Willow Creek lifestyle. I didn't respond, not publicly. Instead, I went quiet. I spent the next 2 weeks compiling everything: drone footage, old plat maps, timestamp trail cam images showing Karen walking her rat dog across my property, and even satellite overlays showing the long-standing boundary lines from when the marshland was first surveyed back in 1981. I called my conservation contact at the Department of the Interior and flagged the activity. He told me to document, but not to escalate. Said if it reached a certain threshold it could qualify for federal enforcement under the Endangered Habitat Interference Clause. I asked what that threshold was. He said mass disturbance of nesting habitat. I made a note. And then just when I thought she couldn't get more delusional came the wedding announcement. It was a glossy trifold brochure stuffed in everyone's mailboxes by a perky teenager in a boat and skateboard helmet. The wedding of the season, it read in looping pink script: Savannah Chase, a Willow Creek love story. I wouldn't have thought much of it if I hadn't flipped to the back panel and seen the map, and there it was. Ceremony site: Willow Commons, event lawn right over the crocodile nest trench right over it. I don't mean metaphorically, I mean the altar was marked exactly 12 feet from Cluck Norris's den. I could have thrown a brick from my hammock and hit the reserved seating section. That's when it hit me. She wasn't just grabbing land, she was using it. The wedding was in 3 weeks, full-blown Pinterest nightmare: tents, generators, seating for 200, catered buffet, live quartet, open bar, and according to the brochure, a swan release at sunset. I just about choked on my lemonade. I reread the whole thing twice to be sure. Nowhere did it mention that the land wasn't hers, or that it wasn't zoned for events, or that the Willow Commons was in fact the southern flood basin of a federally protected crocodile enclosure currently in active nesting season, which meant hormones, territoriality, and a 99% chance of carnage if anyone in pastel touched the wrong patch of reeds. And she was putting her daughter in heels right on top of it. I called the county zoning office, asked if any permits had been filed. The woman laughed. On a habitat parcel? Are you kidding? That'd be a felony. I asked about noise permits, sanitation, alcohol licensing. Nothing, not a trace. Karen had decided this was happening and figured the world would move around her. She was wrong, and I was going to let her find that out the hard way. I didn't tell anyone, not even the sheriff, not yet. I figured the best thing I could do, the most satisfying, legally airtight thing I could do, was let the trespass happen in full view, let her walk all 200 of those bodied guests into a biological minefield, and then sit back, sip my tea in hand. The federal boys, a folder so thick it could stop a bullet, so I watched, waited, took photos. The tents went up 2 days early, white canopies staked deep into protected soil. They even ran temporary power from Karen's house using extension cords, which was a code violation all on its own. The dance floor was set up 10 feet from the croc nesting berm. The bar trailer was parked directly over a turtle burrow. I could see it all from my back porch, a slow-motion train wreck of pastel madness and high-heeled hubris. On the morning of the wedding, they brought in a drone team to capture aerial romance footage. One of those things dipped within 6 feet of the main pond and spooked half the nesters into the shade canopy. That's when I knew it wasn't just going to be a slap on the wrist. It was going to be federal, biblical, the kind of enforcement they write training manuals about. I made myself a sandwich, got my camera, and waited, because what Karen didn't know, what she refused to know, was that she hadn't just lied to her neighbors or overstepped a few property lines. She declared war. and the marsh was about to fight back. I woke up early. That morning not because I was anxious I'd slept like a baby on tranquilizers, but because I knew I was about to witness something rare and beautiful. Karmic justice in linen suits and overpriced heels. I made my coffee strong black and triple filtered. I packed a small cooler with ice water, a pair of binoculars, 3 pens, my field notepad, and a government-issue pamphlet titled Federal Wildlife Violations. Then I hauled my aluminum lawn chair up the slope to the edge of the property line, the real line, not the one Karen had sharpened onto her HOA map. I'd marked it with bright pink surveyor's tape, just in case any photographers tried to drag their tripods across. I had full sun, clear sight lines, and the tactical patience of a man who'd once waited 8 hours for a poacher to step out of a portigan in Louisiana bayou. This was going to be better. The wedding crew was already buzzing by 9 a.m. An army of interns in matching black polos moved like ants across the field, dragging wires, setting tables, adjusting massive floral arrangements made of imported peonies and dyed pampas grass. One of the groomsmen almost fell face first into the bog trying to take a phone call near the catering van. I noted it in my journal. At 10:37 a.m., a drone took off from the corner of the staging area and dipped low over the marshland to film the bridal arch. The arch, oh, that glorious misguided monstrosity, had been erected directly over an active crocodile tunnel, and not just any tunnel. That one belonged to Cluck Norris and his mate Morin, both of whom had been nesting there for the past 2 weeks. I could still remember the moment I'd found her eggs tucked under the mud bank like white grenades. Protective didn't begin to cover it. Morin had once chased off a fox, a raccoon, and a UPS truck in the same day. By noon, the guests began arriving: BMWs, Teslas, rental limos with monogram signs that said Savannah Chase, eternally yours. There were at least 24 women in stilettos stabbing at the dirt like it had insulted them. Men in suspenders tried not to sweat through their linen while waiting for the bar to open. Karen greeted each personally with that top-plastered smile that said everything was perfect, even though the generator had already shorted once and the florist was having a breakdown behind the chafing dishes. I sipped my coffee and took notes. At 1:45 p.m. and the band kicked in a string quartet, obviously, because nothing says wilderness elegance like a cello solo in 92 degrees heat. The sound system crackled, thumped, and sent low-frequency vibrations through the marsh that to the untrained I meant little, but I saw at the moment the ripple like a sixth sense, a faint tremble underfoot. The marsh went still, bird calls stopped, frogs silenced, and then the movement started. First a rustle of cattails, then the splash of displaced water, then, God help them, the hissing. At exactly 1:53 p.m. Morin emerged from the undergrowth like a prehistoric tank, tail dragging, jaw gape, and eyes locked on the floral arch, where 3 bridesmaids were posing with champagne flutes. I don't think they saw her at first. She blended well with the mud, especially when wet, but Cluck Norris was right behind her, and Cluck doesn't blend. Cluck's a 12-foot, 800-pound freight train with a bad attitude and a tracking tag from the Peruvian Rainforest Biodiversity Project. He's also protected under 2 international treaties. When Cluck surfaced and let out a low, guttural growl, the kind that rattles your sternum from 50 foot, that's when the flower girls screamed. What followed was pure uncut chaos. The chalice screamed and bolted into the brush, knocking over a speaker stand. The best man tripped over the champagne ice bucket, trying to climb onto the band platform. One of the flower girls fell into a shallow trench and lost both shoes and her dignity. Guests scattered like pigeons on an airport runway. Karen, bless her beige soul, stood frozen near the generator, screaming into a walkie-talkie that wasn't even turned on. Get the HOA attorney. Where's the attorney? There was no attorney. I knew it. She knew it. The guests would soon know it too, because the only legal presence on that field was me, my notebook, and a laminated badge that hadn't expired. Yet I dialed my wildlife contact with the Fish and Wildlife Service and said simply, "It's happening. They're nesting. We've got civilians on a federally protected zone and an endangered specimen on camera." His response: "We're if there's anything you should take away from this chaos-soaked tale of wedding flowers, sweat, and crocodile ponds, it's this. 1. Don't confuse entitlement with ownership. Just because you have a clipboard, a visor, and a Pinterest dream doesn't mean you get to claim land that isn't yours, especially when that land belongs to the federal government and is guarded by a retired wildlife officer with paperwork, principles, and predators. 2. Respect boundaries. On maps and in mindset. Land has boundaries. Laws have boundaries. Crocodiles definitely have boundaries. And they don't deal with trespassers by sending cease and desist letters. They deal with teeth. 3. Don't mess with nature. Wildlife habitats are not backdrops for Instagram weddings. When you step into nature's territory with arrogance and ignorance, you don't just endanger ecosystems, you endanger yourself. Literally. 4. Laws exist for a reason. And sometimes, the quiet person in chest waders with a bucket of chicken thighs knows the law better than you, and has the paperwork to shut down your entire event with one phone call. 5. And finally, never, ever pick a fight with someone whose pet is named Cluck Norris.